David Reed knelt in the red soil, checking the moisture sensors for the third time that morning. The readings looked good. After 2 years of failed attempts, the terraforming equipment was finally working properly. New Haven's stubborn earth was slowly becoming farmland. He allowed himself a small smile before standing up and brushing the dirt from his knees. His communicator buzzed. A message from Shiraka saying she would meet him for lunch. David felt warmth spread through his chest. 18 months together, and she still made him feel like a nervous teenager. He typed back a quick reply and returned to his work. Shiraka was unlike anyone David had ever known. Her people, the Draconids, were rare visitors to human colonies. Most humans had never seen one in person. They were tall and powerful, with scales that changed color based on their emotions. Shiraka's scales shifted from deep blue when she was calm to bright green when she laughed. David had memorized every shade. She worked as a cultural liaison, helping humans understand Draconid technology and customs. That was how they had met. David needed help interpreting Draconid environmental data for his terraforming project. Shiraka had spent 3 hours explaining the complex systems to him. By the end of that first meeting, David had known he wanted to see her again. Their relationship had raised eyebrows at first. Humans and Draconids did not usually form romantic bonds. The lifespan difference alone seemed impossible to overcome. Draconids lived for centuries while humans barely made it past 100 years. But David and Shiraka had found something real between them. Something worth the complications. David finished his morning fieldwork and headed back to his small apartment in the colony settlement. He was looking forward to lunch with Shiraka. They had planned to try the new restaurant that had opened near the spaceport. His mind was already running through conversation topics when he opened his door. The apartment felt wrong immediately. Too quiet, too empty. Shiraka's belongings were gone. The Draconid meditation crystals she kept by the window. The thermal blanket she needed because human homes ran too cold for her. The data pad she was always reading. Everything had vanished. David's heart began to pound. He rushed through the apartment, checking every room. Nothing. She had taken everything that belonged to her. On the kitchen counter, he found a small data chip with his name written on it in her careful handwriting. His hands shook as he loaded the chip into his reader. A text message appeared. No video, no audio. Just words. David, I am returning to my people. This was always temporary. You will understand someday that this is for the best. Remember me fondly. Shiraka. David read the message 3 times, then 3 more. The words did not change. She was gone. Just like that, with barely an explanation. He sat down heavily on the couch. Their couch, where they had spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing. Where she had taught him basic Draconid phrases. Where he had fallen asleep with his head in her lap while she read. The message said this was always temporary. Had she been planning to leave all along? Had the past 18 months meant something different to her than they had to him? David tried to remember if there had been signs. Had she seemed distant lately? Sad? He could not recall anything unusual. Just last week, she had been talking about accompanying him on his next survey trip to the Northern Territories. David forced himself to think logically. Shiraka was Draconid. Her people had different customs, different expectations. Maybe her family had called her home. Maybe there were cultural obligations he did not understand. She had mentioned once that Draconids faced certain biological imperatives as they aged. Perhaps that was related. He tried calling her communicator. The signal did not connect. He checked the colony departure logs and found her name listed on a transport that had left that morning bound for Draconid space. She really was gone. Over the following days, David moved through his life like a ghost. He went to work, analyzed soil samples, adjusted equipment settings. His colleagues noticed something was wrong but did not press him for details. Word had spread quickly in the small colony. The human and the Draconid had split up. Most people seemed unsurprised. David told himself that Shiraka had done the kind thing. She had ended it cleanly, without drama or false hope. She had left him a message explaining it was for the best. Maybe she was right. Maybe a relationship between their species had been doomed from the start. Maybe she had realized that loving a being who would age and die while she remained young was too painful. That thought hurt more than anything else. The idea that she had loved him but had chosen to walk away because the future looked too hard. Part of David wanted to be angry, but he could not manage it. If she had left out of love, trying to spare them both future pain, how could he blame her? 3 weeks after Shiraka's departure, David received a promotion. The colony needed someone to lead a major terraforming project in the Crimson Barrens, a dangerous region far from the main settlement. The pay was excellent. The work was challenging. Most importantly, it was far away from all the places that reminded him of her. David accepted immediately. He packed his belongings into 2 small cases and boarded the transport heading south. As the settlement disappeared behind him, David made himself a promise. He would throw himself into his work. He would make the Crimson Barrens bloom, and he would stop waiting for a message that would never come. What David did not know, could not know, was that Shiraka had not left because she stopped loving him. She had left because she loved him too much to let him see what she was becoming. Deep in Draconid space, in a medical facility on a remote moon, Shiraka lay in a containment cell. Her scales had begun darkening to black. Energy crackled across her skin in painful arcs. The doctors told her she was entering Kreshava earlier than expected. They told her the emotional stress of her bond with David had accelerated the process. Shiraka had not told David the truth, because there was no cure, no solution, no hope. She had left to save his life. In a few months, she would become a creature of pure rage and electricity. She would have killed him without meaning to, without even recognizing him. So she had run, composing that simple message with tears streaming down her face, her scales flickering between colors so rapidly they appeared almost white. She had left out of love. But the story was far from over. 6 months had passed since David arrived in the Crimson Barrens. The work consumed him, which was exactly what he needed. The vast red desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by jagged rock formations and deep canyons. Nothing grew here naturally. The soil was toxic with heavy metals. The temperature swung wildly between scorching days and freezing nights. It was perfect. David's team had set up a small outpost near the region's largest canyon system. 15 people lived and worked in the cluster of prefab buildings, all of them specialists in extreme environment terraforming. They were attempting something ambitious. If they could make the Crimson Barrens fertile, they could terraform almost anywhere. The key was underground water. Deep scans had revealed massive aquifers trapped beneath layers of impermeable rock. David's plan involved carefully placed charges to fracture the rock layers, allowing water to reach the surface. Combined with soil treatment and atmospheric processors, they might actually pull this off. David rarely thought about Shiraka anymore. At least that was what he told himself. He only thought about her when he saw the sunset turn her favorite shade of gold, or when he solved a difficult problem and instinctively reached for his communicator to tell her, or late at night when sleep would not come and the desert silence pressed in from all sides. Strange things began happening in the 3rd month. Small things at first. Equipment that should have failed kept working. Supply caches appeared in places David had planned to survey. Once, during a dust storm that should have destroyed their drilling equipment, someone had covered the sensitive components with heat-resistant tarps. David and his team had been trapped in the outpost during the storm. Nobody could have gone outside. Then came the raiders. The Crimson Barrens were technically within colony territory, but that meant little this far from civilization. A gang of scavengers and thieves had made the deep desert their home. They raided mining operations and small outposts, taking supplies and equipment. David had been warned about them. He had hired 2 security personnel and kept weapons in the outpost. When the raiders finally came, his team was as ready as they could be. The attack happened at dawn. 15 raiders on modified ground vehicles came roaring toward the outpost. David's security team took defensive positions. David himself grabbed a rifle he barely knew how to use. The outpost's defensive shields could only cover the main building. The drilling equipment and processing units outside were vulnerable. The raiders were 50 meters away when the lightning started. Brilliant blue-white bolts struck the ground around the attackers. Not random lightning from a storm. Precise strikes that hit with perfect accuracy. 3 vehicles flipped over. The others skidded to confuse stops. Another volley of lightning strikes sent the raiders scrambling. They retreated in panic, leaving their damaged vehicles behind. David and his team stood in stunned silence. The sky was clear. No clouds, no storm. Just the rising sun and the smell of ozone in the air. One of the security guards, a woman named Patricia, pointed toward the eastern ridge. Something moved there. Something large. For just a moment, David saw a silhouette against the brightening sky. Tall, powerful, scaled. His heart stopped. It could not be. He was seeing things. Desert mirages, stress hallucinations. The silhouette vanished. David ran toward the ridge, ignoring Patricia's shouts. He climbed the rocky slope, his lungs burning in the thin morning air. When he reached the top, nothing was there. Just footprints in the sand, large footprints with claw marks. Draconid footprints. David stood on that ridge for a long time, staring at the tracks. His mind raced with impossible possibilities. No, she was in Draconid space. She was gone. This was someone else. It had to be. But Draconids were rare in human space. The chance of another one being here, in the most remote region of New Haven, protecting his specific outpost, was nearly zero. Far away, on a moon that orbited a dead planet, Shiraka fought a losing battle. The isolation facility was designed for Draconids going through Kreshva. Thick walls, energy-dampening fields, medical staff who understood the condition. 20 other Draconids occupied separate cells, all of them in various stages of the transformation. Shiraka's scales had turned completely black. Energy crackled constantly across her skin now. The rational part of her mind was slipping away, replaced by ancient instincts. Instincts that screamed at her to hunt, to fight, to destroy anything that moved. The medical staff kept her sedated as much as possible. It helped, but not enough. Kreshva was not an illness that could be drugged away. It was a biological imperative coded into Draconid genetics. Every few decades, their bodies transformed them into apex predators. The process usually lasted 6 to 8 months before slowly reversing. Most Draconids spent that time in facilities like this one, isolated and contained. Shiraka had known it was coming. She had felt the early signs months before she left David. The increased aggression, the growing need to establish territory, the way her bioelectric abilities had started intensifying at random moments. She had consulted Draconid physicians who confirmed her fears. Kreshva was beginning early, probably triggered by the stress of her relationship with a member of another species. She had 3 choices. Enter isolation immediately and hope David understood. Tell him the truth and watch fear replace love in his eyes. Or leave with a simple message and bear the pain alone. She had chosen the third option because she was a coward. Because seeing fear in David's eyes would have destroyed her. In her cell during brief moments of clarity, Shiraka accessed the human information networks. She tracked David's movements. Read his project reports. Watched from afar as he threw himself into his work in the Crimson Barrens. She told herself she was just making sure he was safe. That she was not obsessing, that this was healthy concern and not dangerous fixation. Then raiders attacked his outpost. Shiraka watched the surveillance footage from a hacked satellite feed. Watched David grab a weapon he clearly did not know how to use. Watched him prepare to defend his team against 15 armed criminals. Something broke inside her. Or perhaps something that had been barely holding snapped. The isolation cell could not contain her rage. The energy-dampening fields failed under the surge of power she unleashed. Alarms screamed throughout the facility. Medical staff scrambled to restore containment. Shiraka ripped through the cell door. 2 security Draconids tried to stop her. She threw them aside without conscious thought. Her mind was singular in purpose now. David was in danger. David needed protection. Nothing else mattered. She reached the facility's small spaceport and seized the first ship she could reach. The pilot tried to intervene. Shiraka did not hurt him, but her eyes alone made him back away. She launched the ship with purely instinctive knowledge. Her training buried beneath Kreshva rage, but still accessible in fragments. The facility's alarms continued as Shiraka's ship disappeared into the void. The head physician immediately sent emergency messages to New Haven Colony. A rogue Draconid in full Kreshva was headed their way. Evacuate the area. Do not attempt contact. A containment team was being assembled, but they would need time to arrive. Shiraka did not care about any of that. She pushed the ship's engines beyond safe limits. David was in the Crimson Barrens. David was in danger. She would protect him, even if it meant becoming the very threat she had tried to save him from. The emergency broadcast reached David's outpost 3 days after the raider attack. All colonial settlements were being warned about a dangerous Draconid heading toward New Haven. The alien had escaped from a medical facility and was considered extremely hostile. Citizens should shelter in place. Security forces were mobilizing. Under no circumstances should anyone approach or attempt communication with the rogue Draconid. David listened to the broadcast with growing dread. The description matched the silhouette he had seen on the ridge. Large, powerful, bioelectric abilities. He pulled up the attached surveillance footage from the medical facility. The image quality was poor, obscured by energy discharge, but he recognized her immediately. The way she moved. The distinctive pattern of her scales. Shiraka was here, on New Haven, in the Crimson Barrens. His team gathered for an emergency meeting. Patricia, the security guard, advocated for immediate evacuation. Their outpost was isolated and vulnerable. If a hostile draconid attacked, they could not defend themselves. The mysterious lightning that had saved them from raiders might not happen again. David said nothing during the meeting. His mind was racing. The broadcast said Shiraka had escaped from a medical facility. What kind of medical facility? The message mentioned something called Kresheva, but provided no explanation. Whatever it was, the authorities considered it dangerous enough to warrant evacuation warnings across an entire planet. The team voted to evacuate. Supply ships could reach them in 2 days. They would pack essential equipment and abandon the rest. David agreed outwardly but had no intention of leaving. Not until he found Shiraka and learned the truth. That night, while his team slept, David slipped out of the outpost. He carried basic supplies, a flashlight, and a handheld scanner. The canyon system to the east was where he had seen the footprints. That was where he would start. The desert night was cold and clear. Twin moons lit his path with silver light. David had spent enough time in the Barrens to navigate without getting lost. He knew the dangerous areas and the safe routes. He knew where to find shelter if a dust storm rolled in. He found the first clue within an hour. A small cave in the canyon wall showed signs of recent habitation. Scorch marks on the rock where something extremely hot had touched the stone. Scales scattered on the ground, larger than normal draconid scales and black as midnight. David collected one carefully. It was warm to the touch. The cave had been used as a shelter but recently abandoned. David pushed deeper into the canyon system, following a trail of evidence. More caves, more scales. Claw marks gouged into rock faces, and everywhere the faint smell of ozone that came with electrical discharge. He found supply caches she had hidden, medical supplies stolen from somewhere, food rations, water purification tablets. She had been preparing to stay out here for a long time, staying close to him but not approaching. Watching from a distance, David's heart ached. Whatever was happening to her, she was fighting it. She was trying to protect him even while clearly suffering. The scales he found were evidence of some kind of transformation. The scorch mark suggested she was losing control of her abilities. He ventured further into the canyons, calling her name into the darkness. His voice echoed off stone walls. No response came. But he felt watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. She was here, somewhere close, listening. David found her as dawn began lightening the eastern sky. She stood on a high ledge overlooking a deep canyon. She was larger than he remembered. Her scales were completely black, crackling with blue energy. Her eyes glowed with an eerie internal light. She looked like something from ancient mythology, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Shiraka," David called up to her. His voice sounded small in the vast space. She turned slowly to look at him. For a moment, he saw recognition in those glowing eyes. Then something else took over, aggression, territorial rage. She bared her teeth, and David realized with shock that they had grown longer and sharper. "Stay back, David." Her voice was distorted, deeper than normal, with a strange resonance. "You should not be here. You need to run." "I'm not running," David said, starting to climb toward her ledge. "Tell me what's happening." "Let me help." "You cannot help." The energy around her intensified. Lightning arced from her body to the rock walls. "This is Kresheva. This is what I was trying to save you from. I am becoming something that will kill you without meaning to. Please, David, please run." David reached her ledge and stood facing her. She backed away as if he was the dangerous one. "Explain it to me," he said quietly. "What is Kresheva?" Shiraka's control was clearly slipping. She spoke in fragments, fighting to maintain coherence. "Biological cycle. Happens every 40 to 60 years. We transform. Become predators, territorial, aggressive. Bioelectricity builds until we discharge it. Usually kills anything nearby. The rational mind fades. Only instinct remains: hunt, fight, destroy. How long does it last? 6 to 8 months. Then reverses slowly. We isolate ourselves during Kresheva. Containment facilities. away from others. I felt it starting before I left you. I had to go. Had to protect you. Then why did you come back? Shiraka made a sound between a laugh and a sob. Energy crackled more intensely around her. Because I saw you in danger. The raiders. I could not stay away. I broke containment. Stole a ship. I told myself I would just watch from a distance. Just make sure you were safe. But the HFY is getting stronger. I am losing myself. Soon I will not remember who you are. I will only see prey. David took a step closer. Shiraka flinched back and he saw genuine fear in her glowing eyes. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid of what she might do to him. The lightning that drove off the raiders, David said. That was you. Yes, precise control. I can still manage it. But not for much longer. David, security forces are coming. They have weapons that can kill me. Let them. Do not try to stop them. Like hell I won't, David said. There has to be another way. There is no other way. This is biology. This is what draconids are. Her voice rose to a roar that echoed through the canyons. I left to save your life and now I have doomed us both. Get away from me. She turned and leaped from the ledge, landing in the canyon below with inhuman grace. David watched her disappear into the maze of rock. He sat down heavily, his mind racing. Shiraka was becoming something dangerous. She had come back to protect him even knowing the risk. Now security forces were hunting her. David pulled out his communicator and reviewed everything he knew about the situation. HFY was a cycle, a buildup of bioelectric energy, a transformation that affected the mind as much as the body. The authorities treated it like an unsolvable problem. Isolate the afflicted and wait for it to pass. But David was an engineer. He solved problems for a living. He made hostile environments habitable. He found creative solutions to impossible challenges. If HFY was about energy buildup, maybe there was a way to discharge that energy safely. Maybe there was an alternative to months of isolation and suffering. An idea began forming in his mind. It was risky, probably insane. But it was better than watching Shiraka be hunted down like a monster. David started climbing back toward his outpost. He needed equipment. He needed calculations. He needed to convince people that there was another way. And he needed to do it all before security forces arrived with orders to eliminate the threat. Above him, hidden in the rocks, Shiraka watched him go. Part of her wanted to follow. Part of her wanted to drive him away more forcefully. The two parts warred inside her mind. Soon there would be no parts. Only HFY. Only rage. David returned to the outpost, just as colonial security forces arrived. 3 armored vehicles landed in the desert, kicking up clouds of red dust. Armed personnel poured out, establishing a perimeter. They moved with military efficiency, setting up equipment and scanning the surrounding canyons. Commander Ruth Okafor was a tall woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She found David before he could even enter the outpost. David Reed, I need you to evacuate immediately. This area is now under security lockdown. I need to talk to you about the Draconid, David said. Her name is Shiraka. She's not what you think. Ruth's expression hardened. With respect, you don't know what I think. I've studied HFY incidents. I know what these beings become. I have 17 personnel under my command and I will not risk their lives on sentiment. She's had multiple chances to hurt people and hasn't. She protected my outpost from raiders. She's fighting the condition. Fighting and losing. Ruth pulled up a data pad showing him medical reports. HFY is progressive. Right now she might have moments of control. In a few days, maybe hours, that control will be gone. She'll become a killing machine that doesn't distinguish between friend and enemy. David knew Ruth was not trying to be cruel. She was being practical, logical. Everything in the official reports supported her position, but those reports had never met Shiraka. They did not know what she was capable of when properly motivated. Patricia emerged from the outpost and joined them. Commander, we've detected energy signatures in the canyon system. Multiple discharge events in the past 6 hours. The Draconid is close. Prepare the electromagnetic pulse weapons, Ruth ordered. Surround the canyon. If she emerges, we contain her. If she resists, we neutralize the threat. David stepped between Ruth and her team. Wait, just give me a chance to try something else. Like what? Reasoning with her? Appealing to her better nature? Ruth's voice was not unkind but firm. This is not a negotiation situation. This is a medical crisis with lethal consequences. I'm an engineer, David said. Let me engineer a solution. Before Ruth could respond, 2 more ships descended from the sky. These were Draconid vessels, sleek and organic-looking. 3 Draconids in heavy armor emerged. The leader was ancient, his scales scarred and faded. He approached with the careful dignity of someone who had lived through countless crises. I am Highkeeper Thralan, he said, his voice a deep rumble. We have come for Shiraka. This is a Draconid matter. Ruth and Thralan sized each other up. 2 commanders from different species, both committed to protecting their people. With respect, Highkeeper, this Draconid is on human territory and has posed a threat to human lives. Shiraka has harmed no one, Thralan replied. But I understand your concern. We have sedation technology that can halt the HFY cycle temporarily. However, it is dangerous. Half of those who undergo forced suppression do not survive. David felt ice in his stomach. There has to be another way. Thralan turned his ancient eyes on David. You are the human she bonded with. You are why her HFY came early. Emotional stress accelerates the cycle. Don't blame him, Ruth interjected. Nobody here knew what was happening. I do not blame, Thralan said. I simply state facts. Shiraka's attachment to this human made her vulnerable. The HFY struck earlier than it should have. Her condition is more severe as a result. David's mind was racing. HFY was about energy buildup. He had spent 6 months in the Crimson Barrens working with massive electrical systems. The terraforming array had enormous capacitors designed to store and redirect atmospheric electricity. What if they could adapt those systems? The terraforming array, David said suddenly. We use it to collect and store electrical energy from lightning storms. What if Shiraka could discharge her bioelectricity into the capacitors? Ruth and Thralan both stared at him. Patricia looked skeptical. Those systems are designed for natural lightning, not bioelectric energy. The frequency is different. The power levels are unpredictable, but theoretically possible, David pressed. If we recalibrate the capacitors, adjust the frequency response, we could create a controlled discharge environment. Thralan's expression was unreadable. You propose to allow her to release the energy that has built up during HFY. This has never been attempted. Because Draconids isolate themselves, David said. You treat HFY as something to endure, not something to solve. But what if we're thinking about this wrong? What if the problem isn't the transformation itself, but the energy buildup with nowhere to go? The risk is enormous, Ruth said. If your capacitors can't handle the discharge, the energy release could level everything within a kilometer. You'd turn your terraforming array into a bomb. Then we evacuate everyone except essential personnel, David countered. We set up remote operation. We give Shiraka a chance that doesn't involve months of torture or a 50% death rate. Patricia pulled David aside. This is crazy. You're risking lives on an untested theory. I'm risking my own life, David said. Anyone else who stays is a volunteer. But I'm not going to stand by and watch them kill her or sedate her into a medical coma that might kill her anyway. Ruth and Thralan were deep in discussion. The human commander and the Draconid keeper represented different approaches to the same problem. Ruth saw a threat to be neutralized. Thralan saw a medical case to be managed. Neither saw what David saw, which was someone he loved fighting against her own biology with everything she had. Finally, Ruth turned back to David. If we attempt this, I want safeguards. Remote detonation charges on the capacitors in case of catastrophic failure. All non-essential personnel evacuated to a minimum of 10 kilometers. And if your plan starts to fail, I'm calling it off immediately. Agreed, David said. Thralan was slower to commit. HFY is sacred suffering. It is part of what we are. To interfere with it goes against our traditions. With respect, David said, your traditions involve watching your people suffer for months in isolation. I'm offering a different path. If it works, Shiraka goes free. If it fails, we're no worse off than we started. If it fails, you may die, Thralan pointed out. Then I die trying to help someone I love. That's a better death than most get. Something shifted in Thralan's expression. Perhaps it was recognition of David's commitment. Perhaps it was simply pragmatism. Very well. I will provide technical data on Draconid bioelectricity, but I cannot condone this action officially. I don't need your endorsement, David said. Just your data. The group moved toward the outpost to begin planning. David pulled up schematics of the terraforming array. The capacitor network was extensive, designed to power the eventual underground explosions that would release the aquifers. If they could adapt it to accept bioelectric energy instead of atmospheric discharge, they might have a chance. A roar echoed from the canyons. Everyone froze. It was not a sound any human throat could make. It was pure rage and challenge, the cry of an apex predator declaring territory. "She's close," Patricia whispered, "and she's getting worse." David looked toward the canyons where Shiraka was hiding. Time was running out. Whatever plan they made needed to happen fast, before Shiraka lost the last shreds of her rational mind, before she became the monster everyone feared. He turned to his team. "We have maybe 12 hours before she's too far gone. Let's get to work." In the canyons, Shiraka felt David's presence like a beacon in her fading consciousness. Part of her wanted to go to him. Part of her wanted to drive him away permanently. The HFY was winning. Soon there would be no more choices. Only instinct and rage and the need to destroy anything that moved. David's hands flew across the control panel, recalibrating systems that were never designed for this purpose. The terraforming array sprawled across 2 square kilometers of desert. Massive conductor towers reached toward the sky. Underground, a network of capacitors waited to store energy. The entire system was built to harness lightning from the fierce storms that occasionally swept across the Crimson Barrens. Now they were trying to turn it into a controlled discharge point for a Draconid. In the final stages of crashes, Patricia worked beside him, running diagnostics. Frequency response is still off. Draconid bioelectricity operates on a different wavelength than natural lightning. If she discharges and we can't capture it properly, the feedback could fry every system we have. Thralin stood nearby, consulting Draconid medical texts on his datapad. The energy output during full HFY is difficult to predict. I have seen records of discharges powerful enough to destroy small buildings. I have also seen gentler releases. It depends on the individual. Shiraka is strong, David said, and she's been holding this back for months. We should plan for the worst-case scenario. Ruth had evacuated everyone except 6 people. David, Patricia, 2 engineers named Harold and Yuki, Thralin, and Ruth herself. Everyone else was 10 kilometers away in a safe zone. Remote detonation charges sat armed and ready on each capacitor bank. If things went catastrophically wrong, Ruth could blow the entire array rather than let the energy feedback destroy everything for miles around. The sun was setting over the Crimson Barrens. They had been working for 10 hours straight. The system was as ready as they could make it. Now they just needed Shiraka to cooperate. "I'll go get her," David said. Everyone started arguing at once. It was too dangerous. Shiraka was too far gone. David would be killed before he got close enough to communicate. Ruth tried to order him to stay put. Thralin warned that approaching a HFY Draconid was suicide. David ignored them all. He walked away from the array, heading toward the canyons. He carried no weapons, no protective gear, just a small flashlight and his communicator. The canyon was dark and silent as he entered. No, not silent. He could hear breathing, deep and resonant, predatory. David's instincts screamed at him to run. Millions of years of human evolution had prepared him to fear apex predators. He ignored those instincts and kept walking. "Shiraka," he called. "I know you can hear me. I need you to come with me." A growl echoed from multiple directions. She was moving, circling him, staying in the shadows. David stopped walking and stood still. "We found another way. Not isolation, not sedation. A way to help you through this. But you have to trust me." Lightning struck the canyon wall 3 meters from where David stood. A warning shot. The message was clear. "Go away or the next one would not miss. I'm not leaving," David said calmly. "You came back to protect me. Let me return the favor. Let me help you." Shiraka emerged from the darkness. She was enormous now, easily 3 meters tall. Her scales were black as midnight, crackling with constant electrical discharge. Her eyes blazed like twin stars. She looked at David with an expression caught between recognition and hunger. "Run." Her voice was barely recognizable.
"Cannot control much longer?"
"We'll kill you, David. Run." "I'm not running. I'm walking toward the terraforming array. You can follow or you can stay here. But I'm not leaving you alone." David turned his back on her and started walking. It was perhaps the bravest or most foolish thing he had ever done. Every step he expected to feel lightning tear through his body. Every heartbeat could be his last. But he kept walking slowly and steadily toward the array. Behind him, he heard massive footsteps. Shiraka was following at a distance. He did not look back. He just kept walking. They emerged from the canyon system together. The terraforming array glowed with standby lights. Ruth and the others watched in tense silence as David led Shiraka toward the main discharge point. The Draken had moved like a living storm, energy arcing off her body with every step. "This is insane," Patricia whispered. "This is human," Thoralin replied, and there was something like wonder in his voice. David reached the central conductor platform. It was a raised circle of metal surrounded by discharge towers. He climbed onto it and turned to face Shiraka. "This is it. You release everything you've been holding back. The array captures the energy. We're going to channel it into the underground rock layers. Trigger the aquifer release we've been planning for months." Shiraka stopped at the edge of the platform. Her massive form trembled with barely restrained power. "What if I cannot stop? What if I destroy everything?" "Then we destroy everything together," David said. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're stronger than this. I think you can do this." Shiraka climbed onto the platform. The metal groaned under her weight. She was so close now that David could feel the heat radiating from her body, could smell ozone and something else, something distinctly her underneath the electrical charge. "I'm afraid," she whispered, and for a moment she sounded like herself again. "So am I," David admitted, "but we're going to do it anyway." Thralin's voice crackled over the communicator. "Frequency calibration complete. All capacitor banks ready. Beginning safe distance evacuation now." Ruth, Patricia, and the others were falling back to a reinforced bunker 200 meters away. Only David remained on the platform with Shiraka. Only David would be in the blast radius if this went wrong. "David, you need to evacuate," Ruth's voice came through the communicator. "No," David said simply. He looked up at Shiraka. "I'm staying." Shiraka's control was slipping. He could see it in her eyes. The rational mind was fading fast. The Kreshva was taking over completely. Soon there would be nothing left but rage and instinct. "Now," David said. "Do it now while you still can." Shiraka threw back her head and roared. Lightning exploded from her body in every direction. David felt the air itself ionize. His hair stood on end. Every nerve in his body screamed danger. But he did not move. The discharge towers captured the initial blast. Capacitors hummed to life, absorbing the energy. But it was too much. Alarms began screaming. Systems overloaded. Explosions rippled through the array as components burned out. "Emergency shutdown," Patricia's voice screamed over the radio. "The capacitors can't handle this." "Wait," David shouted back. An idea struck him. They had been trying to store the energy. What if they did not store it at all? What if they just channeled it straight down into the rock layers? Skip the capacitors entirely. Use the array as a conduit, not a battery. He pulled out his communicator and started frantically rerouting power systems. His fingers flew across the touch screen. Around him, Shiraka continued her release. Wave after wave of bioelectric energy poured from her body. The discharge towers glowed white-hot. "What are you doing?" Ruth demanded. "Changing the plan. Don't store the energy, channel it. Send it all directly into the underground fracture points." That's a decade worth of carefully planned charges being replaced by uncontrolled energy discharge. "You'll trigger earthquakes, volcanic activity. Or we'll release the aquifers early. Either way, better than a catastrophic explosion." David finished the rerouting. Now. Everyone hit the discharge controls. From the bunker, his team scrambled to comply. Harold and Yuki overrode safety systems. Patricia opened all the underground channels simultaneously. Thrailin provided real-time calculations on Shiraka's energy output, adjusting the flow rates on the fly. The energy stopped flowing into the capacitors and started flowing down. Deep underground, ancient rock layers began to fracture. The sound was like thunder from below. The entire desert shook. Fissures opened in the red sand and then water erupted, massive geysers shooting hundreds of meters into the air. The underground aquifers, released all at once instead of carefully over months, exploded to the surface. Water that had been trapped for millions of years suddenly found freedom. Shiraka's discharge continued. More water, more geysers. The Crimson Barrens were transforming before their eyes, turning into a temporary lake as water spread across the desert floor. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Shiraka's energy was spent. She collapsed onto the platform, her scales fading from black back to their normal blue-green. David caught her head as she fell. He was burned in several places where the electricity had arced across him, but alive. "Crazy human," Shiraka whispered, her voice normal again. Then she lost consciousness. The terraforming array was destroyed. Half the equipment was melted or exploded. But the Crimson Barrens were flooded with fresh water. The decade-long project had been completed in 5 minutes of uncontrolled chaos. David held Shiraka and started laughing. He could not help it. They were alive. She was through it. Everything was going to be okay. Shiraka woke 3 days later in a medical facility in the main colony settlement. Her first conscious thought was confusion. She was alive. The last thing she remembered clearly was standing on a platform with David, preparing to release energy that should have killed them both. After that, only fragments. Lightning. Water. David's arms around her as she fell. David sat in a chair beside her bed, asleep. He looked terrible. Burns covered his arms where electrical arcs had struck him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. But he was alive. They were both alive. Shiraka tried to sit up. Her body ached in ways she had never experienced. Every muscle felt strained. Her scales were dull and lifeless. But the rage was gone. The Kreshava had passed. She felt like herself again, just exhausted beyond measure. David stirred at her movement. His eyes opened, and when he saw her awake, his face transformed with relief. "Hey, welcome back. What happened?" Shiraka's voice was hoarse. "You discharged enough bioelectricity to power a city for a month. We channeled it into the underground rock layers. You terraformed the Crimson Barrens in about 5 minutes. The medics say you'll recover fully, but you need rest." Shiraka stared at him. "That's impossible." "Yeah, well, humans specialize in impossible." David took her hand carefully, avoiding the medical sensors attached to her wrist. "How do you feel?" "Like I was struck by my own lightning." Shiraka tried to smile, but it came out weak. "David, I could have killed you." "What you did was insanely reckless, probably, but it worked." Before Shiraka could respond, the door opened. Thralin entered, followed by 3 other elder draconids. They all wore expressions of deep concern mixed with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or disbelief. "Shiraka," Thralin said formally, "it is good to see you recovered. What you and David accomplished should not have been possible. But it was," David said, standing to face the elders. "Which means your isolation protocols aren't the only option anymore." One of the other elders, a female with silver scales, spoke sharply. "You interfered with Kreshava. This is against our most sacred traditions." "With respect," David replied. "Your traditions involve watching your people suffer alone for months. I offered a different way, and it worked. Once," the silver-scaled elder said, "under specific conditions that may never be replicated. You had access to massive energy storage systems. You had technical knowledge. You had luck. We had each other," Shiraka said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "The Kreshava was worse because I was separated from David. The emotional stress made it come early and stronger. But it was also why I could fight it. Why I had something to hold on to even as my mind was consumed by rage." Thralin nodded slowly. "The medical staff has analyzed your condition. They believe the emotional bond you formed with David created what they call an anchor point, something your rational mind could grasp even during full transformation." "That's what I tried to tell you," David said. "Shiraka isn't just some draconid who went through Kreshva. She's someone who had a reason to fight it, someone who had something more important than the rage." The silver-scaled elder looked unconvinced. "Even if this is true, it does not change our protocols. Kreshava is dangerous. Isolation protects both the afflicted and those around them." "Isolation is torture," Shiraka said, her voice gaining strength. "I spent months in that facility watching others lose their minds, watching them hurt themselves trying to escape. Your protocols protect others, yes, but they destroy those going through Kreshva. There has to be a better way." Ruth Okafor entered the room, bringing human perspective to the debate. "I've written my report for Colonial Command. What happened in the Crimson Barrens was unconventional, dangerous, and violated about 15 different safety protocols. It was also successful. We managed a situation that could have resulted in multiple casualties with 0 deaths and minimal injuries. You are suggesting we change millennia of tradition based on one success," the silver-scaled elder said. "I'm suggesting you experiment," Ruth replied. "Create controlled discharge facilities. Study the anchor point theory. See if draconids with strong emotional bonds can safely manage Kreshava with support instead of isolation. Science requires testing hypotheses, not clinging to tradition because it's familiar." The debate continued. The draconid elders were divided. Some saw potential in what had happened, Others feared the implications of changing such fundamental protocols. David watched them argue and felt frustrated. They were treating this like an abstract problem. They did not see what he saw, which was Shiraka lying exhausted in a medical bed because she had spent months fighting alone. Finally, Thoralin raised his hand for silence. I propose a compromise. We will establish an experimental program. Draconids who are bonded to others, who have strong emotional anchors, may attempt managed Kreshva transitions at specially designed facilities. These facilities will have energy discharge capabilities similar to what was used here. We will monitor results carefully. If the program shows promise, we expand it. If it proves too dangerous, we return to traditional protocols. The silver-scaled elder looked unhappy but nodded. Very well, but I want strict oversight. And if even one person dies because of this experiment, we shut it down immediately. Agreed, Thoralin said. Over the following weeks, the news spread through both Draconid and human communities. The story of the human engineer who had helped his Draconid partner through Kreshva became something of a legend. Other Draconids in relationships with humans or with other species began to ask questions. Was this really possible? Could there be an alternative to isolation? The medical facility on the isolation moon began to see changes. New equipment was installed, energy discharge systems, monitoring technology, and most importantly, they began allowing visitors. Bonded partners could now stay with Draconids going through Kreshva, providing emotional support under carefully controlled conditions. The results were remarkable. Not every case was as successful as Shiraka's. Some Draconids still required full isolation, but more than half of those with strong emotional anchors managed better outcomes, shorter transformation periods, less psychological trauma, and in a few cases, successful discharge events similar to what Shiraka had experienced. Shiraka herself recovered slowly. The Kreshva had taken a severe toll on her body, but as her strength returned, so did her spirit. She and David spent long hours talking about everything that had happened, about her fear and his determination, about the future they could now actually plan for. One evening, about 2 months after the incident, they stood together on what had been the Crimson Barrens. The desert was unrecognizable. Shiraka's massive energy discharge had released so much water that the entire region had transformed into a temporary lake. As the water slowly drained and evaporated, it left behind rich, wet soil. Plants were already starting to grow. Birds had arrived from other regions. The barren wasteland was becoming an oasis. I still cannot believe we did this, Shiraka said, her scales shifting to a peaceful blue. 10 years of work completed in 5 minutes of chaos. That's humanity for you, David replied. We're terrible at doing things the sensible way, but we're great at improvising. You know Kreshva will happen again, Shiraka said quietly, in 40 or 50 years. We will have to go through this again. I know, and we'll deal with it. By then we'll have proper facilities, better protocols, more understanding of the process. It won't be easy, but it will be manageable. Shiraka turned to look at him. You will be older then. Perhaps not strong enough to stand beside me as you did this time. Then I'll sit beside you, or I'll coordinate from a safe distance. We'll figure it out, Shiraka. That's what we do. She touched his face gently with one clawed hand. You humans are strange creatures. You see impossible problems and your first instinct is to solve them rather than accept them. Is that a compliment? Yes, a very human one, but yes. Her scales shifted to warm gold. I tried to leave you to protect you. I thought love meant keeping you safe from danger. And I learned that love means facing danger together, David said, even when it's terrifying. Even when everyone says it's impossible. Especially then. In the distance, construction had begun on the first joint human Draconid research facility. It would study Kreshva, develop better treatment protocols, and create safe discharge systems. The project was being funded by both governments and led by a mixed team of scientists. Thoralin had agreed to serve as senior advisor. The silver-scaled elder, whose name was Shivera, had grudgingly admitted that the experiment was showing promise. She still believed in caution and careful study, but even she could not deny that David and Shiraka had opened a door that had been closed for millennia. David's team was rebuilding the terraforming array with improvements based on what they had learned. The next version would be specifically designed to handle both atmospheric electricity and bioelectric discharge. They were calling it the Reed Shiraka Array, which made David deeply embarrassed and Shiraka quietly proud. Patricia had been promoted to project lead. She had stood by David during the craziest moment of his life, and that kind of loyalty deserved recognition. Harold and Yuki were designing similar systems for other colony worlds. Ruth had been commended for her flexible thinking under pressure. And throughout the galaxy, in quiet conversations and official meetings, people were starting to realize something important. Humans brought a different perspective to problems. They refused to accept that things had to be done the way they had always been done. They looked at ancient traditions and asked, but why? They took impossible situations and improvised solutions. Sometimes those solutions failed spectacularly. But when they worked, they changed everything. David and Shiraka stood together watching the sunset over the transformed barrens. The sky was painted in shades of gold and purple. Birds called to each other in the growing vegetation. Water reflected the evening light in pools and streams. Do you regret it? Shiraka asked. Knowing what you know now? Knowing what we will face again? David thought about the question seriously. He thought about the fear, the danger, the burns on his arms that were still healing. He thought about watching Shiraka transform into something terrifying and choosing to stand beside her anyway. He thought about the future, decades from now when they would have to do this all over again. No, he said finally. I don't regret any of it. Not meeting you. Not falling in love with you. Not fighting for us when everyone said it was hopeless. Because this, he gestured at the transformed landscape, at the facility being built, at the future they were creating together. This is worth it. You are worth it. Shiraka's scales shifted through several colors before settling on deep gold. In Draconid color language, it meant profound contentment. It meant home. Humans are terrifying, she said, but her tone was affectionate. You look at impossible odds and your response is to build something new. That's what makes us human, David said. We don't accept that something is impossible just because it's never been done before. We don't give up on the people we love just because it's hard. We fight, we improvise. We find another way. Together, Shiraka added. Together, David agreed. They stood there as darkness fell over the transformed barrens. In the distance, lights from the new facility glowed against the night sky. Above them, stars appeared one by one, and somewhere out there, other Draconids were learning that Kreshava did not have to be faced alone. Other couples were discovering that love between species was not a tragedy waiting to happen, but a challenge that could be met with determination and creativity. David had believed she left out of love. He had been right. But he had also shown her that love was not about protecting each other from danger. It was about facing danger together and refusing to accept that impossible problems must remain unsolved. It was very human thinking, and it was changing the galaxy, one improvised solution at a time.